It all started on a rainy Tuesday evening. The kind of rain that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes the streets shine like black glass, reflecting the neon lights of the city. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really trying to avoid thinking about what had become my life. You see, I used to think life had a pattern, like the predictable lines in a painting. But sometimes, just sometimes, life throws a brush at you, smears it across the canvas, and suddenly, everything you thought you knew is nothing but a lie. My family, we weren't perfect. Nobody's is. But we were happy in that chaotic, slightly broken way that families are happy, warm, loud, filled with little fights that ended with laughter, meals that ended with leftovers for days, and inside jokes that nobody outside could ever understand. My parents were the kind of people who gave more than they took. My mom, a teacher with a laugh that could light up a room, and my dad, a quiet man who only spoke when it mattered, always making you feel like he'd known the answer to life's questions all along. And then there was me, the middle child, quietly watching, absorbing, learning. We lived in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, whether you wanted them to or not. Our house had creaky floors, an overgrown backyard, and the smell of my mom's cinnamon rolls that never seemed to leave. I grew up thinking this was as good as life could get, until the cracks started showing. It started with subtle things. A missed dinner here, a whispered argument there. I would hear my parents murmuring late at night, the sound of the front door clicking softly as one of them left for a walk to cool off. I was 25, old enough to understand that marriages weren't perfect, but young enough to believe in them anyway. And my parents, I thought, were perfect enough. And then came the first red flag, or maybe the first domino, because once one falls, the rest just follow. It was a casual Saturday morning. I was making coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, when my dad's phone buzzed. He didn't normally answer calls immediately, so I glanced at the screen. And there it was. A name I didn't recognize, followed by a string of messages that made my stomach twist. I didn't mean to read them. I really didn't. But curiosity, that dangerous, irresistible beast, had already snared me. The messages were playful at first, innocent seeming. "Can't wait to see you," one said. "You looked amazing yesterday," another. And then, as if someone had pressed fast forward on my life, I saw the next message. "I think we need to talk in person." Alone. My heart stopped. I stared at the phone, my mind scrambling for excuses, for denials, for anything that would make this seem like a mistake. But deep down I knew. That feeling, that icy, creeping dread that wraps around your chest like a vice, told me I was seeing exactly what I feared. The next days were a haze. I watched my father closely, noticing the way he lingered on his phone, the quick glances over his shoulder, the sudden changes in his schedule. And then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that shattered the fragile illusions I'd clung to my entire life. He was on the phone, whispering, voice tense, almost desperate. I know, but we'll figure it out. We just need time. Just don't tell anyone." That was it. The first concrete proof. The first undeniable confirmation. And just like that, the ground beneath me crumbled. Everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, was suddenly covered in cracks. It wasn't just my father. I started noticing things about my mom, too. The way she smiled at him, not with warmth, but with a practiced grace, a smile that barely hid the tension in her eyes. The way she sometimes lingered in her room for hours, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly, a quiet frown etched on her face. I realized that both of them were hiding things from each other, from the world, and from me. And in that moment, I made a choice. I wouldn't confront anyone, not yet. I would watch. I would wait. I would gather the pieces of their secrets, like a detective, silently collecting evidence until the perfect moment came. Because sometimes revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with patience. Life, as I knew it, was about to get a lot more complicated. The next few weeks were a living nightmare wrapped in normalcy. Every morning, I would wake up, make my coffee, and pretend everything was fine. My father would sit at the kitchen table, newspaper in hand, pretending to read, while my mother hummed softly in the background, her eyes flicking toward him now and then with a tension that was almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. I started keeping a journal. I needed to remember things, to document every little slip, every moment that didn't add up. I became hyper-aware of my parents' habits. The way my dad's cologne suddenly smelled stronger, as if he wanted to mask something. The way my mom left the room when certain topics came up, her lips pressed tightly together. Small things, but when you're searching for a pattern, small things become massive. And then one night, the truth hit me like a hammer. I was home late from work, the city streets drenched in rain, neon lights reflecting off puddles like shards of glass. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hold your breath. I headed to the kitchen for a glass of water when I noticed a faint light coming from my dad's study. I didn't usually go in there, but something told me I needed to see this. Through the slightly ajar door, I saw him on a video call. His expression was tense, nervous even. And then I saw her, this woman I had never met before, smiling, leaning forward as if she were sharing a secret. My stomach churned. My hands shook. I couldn't hear the words, but the intimacy of the gestures, the way they leaned toward each other, the soft laughter, it was unmistakable. My father was involved. Not a harmless flirtation, but something deeper. Something he was hiding from everyone he had ever loved. The next day, I confronted a friend of mine, a quiet confidant who had a knack for uncovering truths. I described everything I had seen. Together, we began piecing together a timeline, noticing patterns, the sudden work trips, the mysterious late-night texts, the whispered conversations. Everything fit together like a puzzle I had never wanted to solve. But it wasn't just my father. My mother's behavior had been subtly strange for months. And then I caught her, on her phone, messaging someone late at night. The name was familiar from a birthday party years ago. At first, it didn't mean anything but the tone, the emojis, the laughter. It was flirtatious, almost intimate. I realized the horrifying truth. My parents were cheating. Both of them. Independently. Secretly. And they had been hiding it from me, from each other, from the world. I felt my chest tighten, my hands clammy. How could this happen? How could the people who had taught me love, honesty, and trust betray all of it? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many lies had been told in this very room. Every word, every gesture, every memory suddenly felt tainted, as if I had been living inside a house built on deception. But that's when the shift happened. The shift from hurt to resolve. Because anger, I realized, could be harnessed. It could be transformed into a weapon. And I had no intention of letting this slide. Not now. Not ever. I began watching, observing, collecting evidence. Phone records, emails, receipts, even subtle details like lipstick marks on collars or unfamiliar scents in the kitchen. I became a shadow, moving silently, unnoticed, while gathering proof. Every late-night text, every hushed phone call, every secret meeting, I documented it all. And then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. One evening, I found a notebook hidden in my father's study, filled with letters. Letters to this other woman. Handwritten, filled with confessions, dreams of running away, promises that he would leave me and my mother behind. But the kicker? The letters weren't just one-sided. She had replied, confessing her love, fantasizing about a life together, making plans that could destroy everything. It wasn't just cheating. It was betrayal on a monumental scale. And it was deliberate. My father had planned this, meticulously, thinking no one would ever find out. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my mind racing. This wasn't just personal, it was strategic. And strategy required precision. The following week, I discovered my mother's secret as well. She wasn't just flirting online. She had met someone in person. Dinner dates, long walks, late-night drives, all under the guise of working late. Her messages were affectionate, teasing, intimate. She had been living a double life, just like my father. By this point, I was both horrified and fascinated. I had always believed in the sanctity of family, in loyalty, in love. And now, all of it had crumbled before my eyes. But there was something else growing inside me. Something dark, something thrilling. Revenge. Not a childish, petty revenge. Something precise. Something unforgettable. Something that would leave them questioning every choice, every action, every secret they thought they had kept hidden. I began planning. Each move, each counter, each revelation had to be calculated. There was no room for error. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the child who had watched, learned, and now was ready to act. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Both my parents were clever, manipulative in their own ways. They had kept these secrets hidden for years, each thinking they were untouchable. But I had something they didn't. Perspective, clarity, and patience. I started mapping out the possibilities. Phone taps, staged encounters, orchestrated accidental revelations. Every tool I could use to turn the tables, every detail I could manipulate to make them see the consequences of their actions. And yet, the suspense of it all was intoxicating. Every day, I imagined the moment when the truth would finally hit them. The look in their eyes, the guilt, the panic, the disbelief. How long would it take for them to realize that their secrets were no longer theirs alone? For the first time in weeks, I felt alive. Not the calm, safe life I had known before. Not the warm, comfortable illusion of family. Alive in a way that only someone who has glimpsed the depths of betrayal can feel. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about anger. It's about control. It's about taking a situation that seemed hopeless, turning it inside out, and finally deciding the rules. And I had decided. This wasn't going to be a small act. It wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. It would be elaborate, dramatic, unforgettable. Little did they know, every smile, every casual remark, every ordinary day was being watched, noted, and cataloged. Every slip-up, every hidden message, every betrayal, they would see the consequences. And they would regret it. Because by the time I was done, nothing would be the same. The days after discovering the truth were some of the hardest I had ever lived. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house, the creak of a floorboard, the soft hum of the refrigerator, even the clock ticking on the wall, made my heart race. I saw them, my parents, walking around like nothing had changed, smiling at me, laughing at trivial jokes, but I could see the cracks now. I could see the lies hiding behind their eyes. I started questioning everything. Every childhood memory felt tainted. The vacations, the birthdays, even the simple hugs. Were they genuine or just an act? The thought of it made bile rise in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear from the house altogether. But instead, I did what I do best. I observed. I planned. Anger surged through me like a storm, but I realized that blind rage wouldn't be enough. Blind rage destroys the one wielding it first. If I was going to do this, if I was going to make them feel the weight of their betrayal, I needed a plan. A meticulous, flawless plan. And I had 6 months. 6 months to turn this entire house into a stage for their reckoning. I started small. I tested the waters. I left subtle hints about what I knew, small, almost imperceptible things. A casually dropped comment about honesty. A well-timed question about loyalty. My father's eyes would flicker with unease. My mother's smile would falter ever so slightly. These were minor victories, but they felt intoxicating. Every twitch of guilt, every pause, every shift in their posture fed the fire burning inside me. Then came the real emotional turmoil. Sitting in my room late at night, I couldn't help but ask myself, was this really me? Was I becoming someone I hated? My hands shook as I traced the lines of my journal, reading the notes I had meticulously kept. Evidence, secrets, confessions, all catalogued with the precision of a seasoned investigator. And yet, beneath the satisfaction of control, there was a gnawing emptiness. I realized revenge was intoxicating, yes, but it came at the cost of my own innocence, my own peace. I sat with that for hours. I thought about forgiveness. I thought about confrontation. I thought about running away and never looking back. But the thought of leaving them untouched, leaving them smug in their deceit, was unbearable. No, if I was going to survive this, I couldn't just be a victim. I had to be the architect of their downfall. I began mapping out scenarios, writing each step down in extreme detail. Every interaction, every coincidental meeting, every revealed secret had to be staged with precision. The plan wasn't just to expose them, it was to make them experience the full spectrum of guilt, humiliation, and fear they had inflicted on me. I started with my father. He was meticulous, proud, and careful, but predictable in his arrogance. I knew he kept a little black notebook where he recorded details about his affair, dates, times, places, even future plans. Finding that notebook became my first mission. The night I found it was surreal. I waited until he fell asleep, his breathing deep and even, then slipped silently into his study. The notebook was exactly where I expected it to be, tucked in the back of his top drawer. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of his secrets. Each page was a confession, each line a dagger aimed at the heart of my family. I photographed every page, carefully documenting them, then returned the notebook exactly where I had found it. He never knew it was missing. With my father's secrets secured, I turned my attention to my mother. She was subtler, more careful. Her betrayal wasn't physical, it was emotional, a web of whispered texts, stolen moments, and clandestine meetings. I started collecting her messages, screenshotting conversations, recording timestamps, and noting patterns. She had no idea that I could see everything. She didn't know I was already steps ahead, planning the perfect exposure. The real challenge, though, was my own emotions. I was caught in a storm of hate, sadness, and exhilaration. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, mourning the family I had thought I had. Other nights, I stayed awake, imagining the precise moment when the truth would hit them, imagining the look on their faces when the web I had woven finally trapped them. I even considered involving outside parties. Friends, acquaintances, anyone who could witness their reactions without knowing I was orchestrating it all. But no, that would risk chaos, unpredictability. This had to be contained, intimate, a surgical strike on their psyche. I spent weeks perfecting the psychology of my plan. I read books on manipulation, human behavior, and the science of guilt. I studied famous cases of betrayal and revenge. I built profiles for both my parents, what buttons to push, what fears to exploit, what insecurities to magnify. Everything they had hidden from the world would now be turned into a mirror, reflecting back the damage they had done, not just to me, but to themselves. The thrill of it all was overwhelming. I realized I was no longer a child watching from the sidelines. I was the mastermind. Every conversation, every gesture, every carefully planted clue was a move in a game they didn't even know existed. And yet, the suspense was killing me. Every morning, every family meal, every casual comment made my pulse race. I had to act normal, pretend nothing had changed, while the storm built quietly under the surface. It was like living in a house built on dynamite, one wrong move, and it could all collapse prematurely. Finally, after months of observation, collection, and psychological preparation, I felt ready. Ready to execute. Ready to make them confront their lies in ways they could never anticipate. Ready to watch them squirm, panic, and finally feel the weight of their own deception. But I knew one thing. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about justice, precision, and inevitability. And when it came to them, I had all three. The plan was no longer just a fantasy. It was a living, breathing entity. Every detail accounted for, every reaction predicted. The stage was set, and I was about to light the fuse. Because by the time I was done, neither of them would ever underestimate me again. The morning of the execution felt ordinary. Too ordinary. I made breakfast, poured coffee, smiled politely at my parents as they discussed their day, all while a storm of anticipation raged silently in my chest. The calm before the storm, I thought, savoring the delicious irony. They had no idea the web I had spun around them, no clue that every casual glance, every mundane action was part of the stage I had meticulously set. I started with subtle psychological strikes, tiny, almost imperceptible triggers that would make them question themselves before the real reveal. For my father, I began dropping innocuous comments about trust and secrets that ruin lives during conversations. I left copies of the photographs of his affair notebook in places he might notice if he looked carefully: his desk, a drawer he frequented, even his briefcase. At first, he ignored them, assuming I had misplaced them. But over time, the anxiety in his eyes became undeniable. Every time he picked up one of those photos, I could see the pulse of panic building, the knowledge that he wasn't as untouchable as he had believed. With my mother, I played a different game. She thrived on subtlety, manipulation, and emotional control. I began responding to her with unexpected indifference, ignoring her flirtatious comments, questioning small inconsistencies casually, as if I weren't paying attention. She started second-guessing herself, hesitating in ways she never had before. The perfect psychological unraveling had begun. Then came the first real strike, a confrontation staged to look accidental. My father was in the kitchen when I found a hidden phone under a stack of mail. It wasn't his phone. It was a burner I had planted, containing screenshots and recordings of his own messages. I gasped in fake shock, dropping it on the counter. "Well, what is this?" he asked, voice trembling. I shook my head, feigning disbelief. "I don't even know, Dad, this just fell out. I guess it belongs to someone you know." His eyes widened as he rifled through the messages, realizing immediately that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. The panic in his expression was intoxicating. I walked away, leaving him alone with his guilt, the first thread of fear tugging at his carefully constructed confidence. Next, I turned my mother's world upside down. She had been preparing dinner when I casually mentioned a friend who had received some interesting messages recently. Her face froze, eyes darting nervously. I let the pause stretch uncomfortably long, then smiled sweetly and moved on. Later, she found copies of her own flirtatious texts waiting discreetly in the laundry room, carefully curated to make her realize she had been exposed without knowing who had done it. The small victories were delicious, but the main act, the moment where the full weight of their betrayals would crash down, was still to come. I had orchestrated a family dinner, inviting a few friends who were aware of nothing but would witness everything, perfectly staged. It was an unremarkable Friday evening. Candles on the table, wine glasses glinting in the dim light, the smell of roasted chicken filling the room. Everything was normal, too normal. As the dinner progressed, I let slip casual, seemingly innocent comments. Funny how people keep secrets, isn't it? I guess some things can't stay hidden forever. My mother tensed. My father stiffened. I didn't need to say more. They already knew the game was on, but they couldn't guess the magnitude. The first real shock came when I projected a slideshow on the living room wall, a compilation of their secrets, meticulously documented over months. Texts, photos, notes, and even recordings were displayed one by one. A slow, brutal reveal. My friends, discreetly positioned around the room, watched as their carefully curated lives unraveled before their eyes. My father's jaw dropped. How did you get these?" he stammered, panic-stricken. "I guess you just underestimate me," I said softly, almost cruelly, watching the color drain from his face. My mother's face turned pale. You've been watching us?" I nodded, letting the silence stretch. "I've seen everything. Every lie. Every secret. Every betrayal. And now it's time you feel the weight of it." The tension in the room was suffocating. For a moment, all I could hear was the steady ticking of the clock and the shallow breaths of two people who had believed themselves untouchable. And then I struck again, with the second layer of revenge. I had arranged for a series of anonymous letters to be delivered to key people in their social circles, friends, colleagues, even distant family members. Each letter contained evidence of the affairs, carefully worded to protect identities while exposing just enough to cause maximum discomfort. Within days, their reputations, carefully maintained for decades, began to falter. Invitations vanished, gossip spread like wildfire, and they were left scrambling to explain themselves. But the final, most personal strike was the one that would haunt them forever. I had staged a chance meeting at a local cafe, inviting both their secret partners without them knowing, under the guise of casual coincidence. The moment they walked in and saw each other, and then me sitting at the corner table with evidence laid out for all to see, was priceless. My father's face went white. My mother's hands trembled. Their partner's shock mirrored their own. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. The horror, confusion, and betrayal on all sides played out like a live theater production, with me as the director controlling every scene. Their carefully hidden worlds collided violently, leaving chaos, guilt, and regret in the aftermath. Over the next week, I watched from the sidelines as they tried to piece together their lives. My father's office was in turmoil. My mother's friends questioned her loyalty. Their social circles whispered behind closed doors. Everywhere they turned, they faced consequences for the secrets they had thought were untouchable. And all the while, I remained calm, a silent observer of my own meticulously orchestrated justice. But revenge, I realized, is never fully satisfying. There were moments of guilt, moments where I questioned if I had gone too far. Yet, in those moments, I reminded myself of the pain they had caused, the trust they had shattered, and the lessons they needed to learn. My plan wasn't about cruelty. It was about exposure, about accountability, about ensuring that betrayal carries consequences. By the end, they were changed. Not broken entirely, but humbled, aware of their mistakes in a way they had never been before. And I emerged from the chaos not unscathed, but empowered, having faced the darkest parts of my own heart and channeled them into something purposeful. The dust settled slowly, almost painfully. The storm I had orchestrated left nothing untouched. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal had been exposed, and my parents were left to pick up the pieces of the life they had fractured. The house, once warm and comforting, felt quieter now, heavier, like the walls themselves were carrying the weight of the chaos that had unfolded. For days, they barely spoke to each other. When they did, it was civil but strained, the kind of conversation that feels rehearsed because the raw truth is too dangerous to voice. Friends and family had slowly pulled back, either shocked by the revelations or unsure how to interact with people who had lived double lives for so long. Their reputations, carefully built over decades, were shaken to their core. As for me, I had to confront my own emotions. Revenge is intoxicating, yes, but it also comes with a price. I had felt the thrill of control, the power of orchestrating the downfall of those who had hurt me, but I had also felt exhaustion, guilt, and a profound sadness for the family I thought I had lost. I realized that while I had won in some ways, I had also inherited the consequences of their actions, and mine. One night, I sat alone in my room, the city lights flickering outside my window, and thought about the past year. I remembered my childhood, the warmth, the laughter, the love that had once filled these walls. I mourned it, not for the illusions, but for the trust that had been broken. I also understood something crucial. Revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about reclaiming agency, about restoring balance when someone else has taken liberties with your life. Over time, I began to rebuild relationships on my own terms. I reached out to distant family, friends who had remained loyal, and people I had previously taken for granted. I learned to trust again, slowly, cautiously, understanding that boundaries and awareness were my allies now. My parents? They, too, had to navigate the aftermath of their actions. They couldn't undo the past, but they were forced to confront the truth and make choices about how, or if, they wanted to move forward. And the lesson? Karma isn't a fairy tale. It's a process. Actions have consequences, often in ways you cannot predict. Betrayal, secrecy, and deceit may feel safe in the moment, but they leave a trail. And when that trail intersects with someone who has both the insight and the patience to act, the outcome can be catastrophic. But it's not about humiliation for its own sake. It's about truth. Exposure. The lesson that no one is untouchable, that every choice echoes beyond what we imagine. In the end, I didn't do it out of anger or hate. I did it to reclaim my life, to take control of the chaos that had been forced upon me. I didn't need them to suffer forever. I just needed them to see the reality of their actions, to feel the weight they had imposed on others, and to understand that trust, once broken, can't be ignored. The house eventually quieted again, the chaos settling like dust after a storm. And in that quiet, I found peace, not because the wounds were healed, but because I had asserted my own power, reclaimed my own narrative, and survived the betrayal that had once threatened to consume me. I learned that family, trust, and love are precious, but they're not invincible. People may disappoint, lie, and betray, but how you respond defines you far more than their actions ever could. I chose to be the architect of my own story, and in doing so, I discovered something essential. Resilience is born not from perfection, but from the courage to face chaos, confront betrayal, and emerge stronger, wiser, and unbroken. And as I sit here, reflecting on all that has happened, I know this. Revenge may be dramatic, shocking, and painful, but when wielded with precision and purpose, it can illuminate the truth in ways nothing else ever can.